Thank you. Good morning, good afternoon, depending on where you are joining us from. Welcome to this public dialogue series where we'll be talking about technology as a tool of enhancing public confidence in elections in Africa. Before we get started, we'll have some housekeeping rules which will be displayed on your screen. As your moderator today, my name is Amos Jogona, and I serve as the Dean in charge of the School of Graduate Studies, Research and Extension here at United States International University in Nairobi. We do have French interpretation, so if you'd like to hear interpretation, please choose the French channel in the interpretation tab. Kindly confirm that you can see that at the bottom of your screen. If you are using a phone or tablet, please select your preferred channel, then tap Done. A recording of this dialogue will be shared with the attendees. I will invite the Deputy Vice Chancellor in charge of Academic and Student Affairs, who is also a Professor of Sociology and Criminal Justice here at USIU Africa in Nairobi, to give his opening remarks. So for a minute, I'll just allow him to flip over and start. Thereafter, I will introduce the presenters who will then make their respective presentations, and we shall have Q&A thereafter. Please feel free to type all your questions, comments on chat, and we will be able to respond to all of them. Let's have fun. It's a good afternoon, a good morning, wherever you are. And I'm looking forward to having a very good discussion with everyone. I do now invite Professor Munyai Mudinge, who is the Deputy Vice Chancellor in charge of Academic and Student Affairs and Professor of Sociology and Criminal Justice at USIU Africa.
Good afternoon, good morning, colleagues. I am extremely excited that I welcome you to this public dialogue series, which focuses on technology as a tool of enhancing public confidence in elections in Africa. This event is co-hosted by the Alliance for African Partnerships, AAP, and USIU Africa. The event addresses a critical area, namely elections, which we all know have resulted in significant disruptions in both developing and developed countries. Linking the topic with technology, therefore, is important, as technology is an enabler and generates efficiency. Yet, technology has also been a cause of controversy in the United States, and most recently in Kenya. So discussing why this happens and finding solutions for it is truly a matter of global importance. Our relationship with the Alliance for African Partnerships dates to 2018, when the United States International University Africa became the only private university in the consortium of 10 universities. AAP's mission is perfectly aligned with our university strategy. I am proud to note that when we were designing our 2021-2026 strategic plan, we reviewed the AAP strategic directions and ensured that our aspirations are in tandem This is the true spirit of beneficial and strategic relationships between universities in the global north and in the global south. We are looking forward to welcoming faculty from Michigan State University and other consortium members to come and spend some time with us as we exchange knowledge and nurture this relationship. To AAP, the message from USIU Africa is that we shall endeavor to continue working together and enriching the experience of the partnership. Our university will be a firm partner and will continue working with the universities in the alliance. As I end my brief remarks, allow me to thank most sincerely Ms. Joseph Malete, our presenters, Caroline Logan, Kailaboga Dipogiso, and Mercy Kaburu. Also, our focal point for AAP, Professor Amos Njuguna. With those few remarks, I wish you fruitful deliberations and best wishes from our Vice Chancellor, Professor Maggie Ensign. I thank you all.
Thank you, Professor Mulinge, for those opening remarks. We'll now, without much ado, shift over to the presentations of the day. The first presentation will be made by Caroline Logan, who is the Director of Analysis, Afrobarometer, and Associate Professor of Political Science, Michigan State University. Her presentation is on public confidence and credibility of elections in Africa. So, Caroline, over to you to make your presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Amos. I'm going to just share my screen. We can get started. Okay, hopefully you can all see my screen.
Yes, we can.
Yeah, okay, very good. All right, well, thank you. It's a real privilege to join you all today to talk about this topic from the perspective of what citizens have said to Afrobarometer about elections. We'll talk about public confidence in elections and why it matters. I'll just give a brief overview. I'm not sure if everybody is familiar with the Afrobarometer, so let me just tell you a little bit about what we do and go on from there. Afrobarometer is a Pan-African, nonpartisan research network. Our core objectives, we do public attitude surveys with our signature topics being democracy and governance. You can see we're working in many countries now. We've worked in up to 39 countries on the continent and hoping to achieve 40 or more in our current round of surveys. Our key goals are to collect scientifically reliable data on public attitudes and views and experiences across the continent as an input to policymakers and policy processes, to build capacity for survey data collection and for analysis, and to broadly disseminate those results and make sure that the public voice is being heard in public policy debates. The project started in 1999. We finished 8 rounds of surveys, and we're actually now late in our 9th round of surveys, which we will finish by the end of this year in somewhere between 38 and 40 countries. We use nationally representative samples, so our findings represent the views of the population of each country as a whole. We do our surveys face-to-face and in the language of the respondent's choice. The core goal of the project is, as I've said, to give Africans a voice in public policy making. Looking at the topic of today's webinar on technology and election quality, I'll say up front, I can't speak a lot to the question of technology specifically. This isn't an area Afrobarometer's asked about in the past. It may be something that we'll try to fit into our round 10 surveys. But what we do have a lot of data on is public attitudes about elections, how important they are, how much they participate, what the quality, how they perceive the quality of their elections. And also very importantly for this conversation, some data on why that matters, why election quality matters, not just on voting day and in the selection of leaders, but in the long-term legitimacy and effectiveness of the governments that are elected into power. So I'm just going to run you through fairly briefly some findings from Afrobarometer about a few of these areas, and then I hand over to my colleagues. So first, just looking at support for elections, one of the things we see in Africa is that there is a widespread and quite resilient support for elections as the best way to choose a country's leaders. We ask people whether it's the best method for choosing leaders. On average, these are the findings from our round 8 surveys in 2019 to 2021 in 34 countries. 75% agreed that elections were the best way to choose leaders. You can see that's a majority in every country except Lesotho. We could come back and talk about specific countries and some of the what's and whys, but you can see, up to 90% in some countries supporting elections. So it's a pretty resounding public commitment to elections as the best method. We also asked more specifically about multi-party competition and whether people believe that many parties are needed to make sure people have choices, or whether having multiple parties creates too much division and confusion. You can see here the average bar in the middle there, 63% of people, so almost 2/3, agree that multiple parties are needed to contest in elections, compared to about 1 in 3 who think that is not necessary. There's some outlier countries you can see at the bottom, Lesotho, Tunisia especially, that have much lower support for multi-party competition, but overall very resounding support. I just wanted to show you this because it mentions a couple of the countries that are part of our special discussion today, Botswana and Kenya. These are, we look not just at the current views, but in how things are changing over time. This is the support for multi-party competition over about the last decade. And you can see that in Kenya, there's been a sizable increase, a 10 percentage point increase in support for multi-party competition, and Botswana, a similar plus 11-point increase. So 2 countries where the findings on those on competitive elections are quite strong. In terms of election efficacy, we asked people a couple of questions about how effective they think elections are. We asked whether they think that elections are effective in ensuring that members of parliament reflect the voters' views. This question was asked in 22 countries rather than all 34. You can see people are a bit divided and not entirely confident in this. 50% said they think that elections do not do a very good job of ensuring MPs reflect voters' views, compared to 42% who agreed. And we also asked whether elections enable voters to remove leaders who don't do what the people want. And again, 50% said they don't think they're very effective that way. These are important elements, not of the specific quality of a specific election, but of the general efficacy of elections. And when we look, I haven't included these results today, but when we look at the impact of these, we see that people who do think elections are effective are somewhat more likely to vote and somewhat more likely to engage in the political system. So it's an important element of quality. This just shows you the variation across countries on the question about whether elections enable voters to remove leaders from office who aren't performing well. You can see that there's some countries up at the top there where people have quite high confidence in the efficacy of elections: Gambia, Tanzania, Ghana, Sierra Leone, a few others. Kenya's in the middle. People are fairly evenly divided in Kenya. 46% say yes, 49% say no. Botswana is a bit higher. 56% have confidence in elections. We tend to see that the more democratic countries have more confidence in the efficacy of elections. What about the supply of quality elections? What are people saying about how good the quality of their elections is? First, one really encouraging finding that's been quite consistent over time is that we do find that people in all countries, a majority report that they feel free to vote as they choose without pressure. This is a really important element. Obviously, some countries have a more open and free political environment than others, but even in some of the most closed political countries, people feel free to cast their own vote as they choose. So that's a very positive finding for elections. In terms of whether people thought the most recent election in their country was free and fair, you can see there's a pretty solid support, 63%. Now, I'll point out that this in Kenya, for example, was the survey that this reports was not the most recent survey that just occurred, but this is from the previous election. So obviously we'll be looking to see what happens in Kenya when we do our next survey and whether confidence in the elections has increased or not. But on average, 63% think that their last election was free and fair, either completely or mostly free and fair. You can see in the smaller chart down in the lower right that those findings have remained pretty constant over time. The blue line being the proportion who think it's been free and fair over the last decade, and it's stayed pretty steady. There's no significant, statistically significant change in that view. We also, though, asked in round 8, asked a number of questions about the election environment in the last election, and whether people thought that the playing field was largely free and fair and level for all candidates, and a variety of questions about the election environment. You can see that there's a wide range in terms of what people saw. This doesn't break down by country. This is 34 country average, but you can see the biggest concern that's raised by the public generally is about media coverage and providing fair coverage. 49% said that they did not think that the media provided fair coverage of all candidates. 35%, so this is a minority opinion, but still 1 in 3 people across all the individuals we surveyed said they thought votes were not accurately counted or reflected in the results. So there's still quite significant problems. It's a minority position, but quite a substantial minority position that has concerns about whether votes are being counted fairly. About 1 in 4 think it's likely that powerful people can find out how you vote. 1 in 5, 21% believe that some people vote more than once. And about the same number have some fear of becoming a victim of political intimidation or violence during the campaign. So you can see that these 1 in 5 is clearly not a majority, but it's still an important share of the public that feels some degree of intimidation when casting their votes. Fewer people were reporting issues around police or soldiers being involved, or security forces intimidating voters. Less than 1 in 10 saw those kinds of problems. This is one of the specific questions broken down by country, whether the announced results of the most recent election were inaccurate. This reports the percent who said they were inaccurate. You can see on average, that's about 1 in 4, 26% had concerns about that, but a really wide range. You've got Botswana down there at the bottom with a couple of other countries at just 6% having concerns. Up at the top, Gabon, 68%, and more than half in Sudan and Malawi as well. Kenya, 35%, about 1 in 3 thought the last election had significant problems in results reporting. So why does this all matter? Obviously, what people think about election quality matters during the election itself, and as results are being reported and candidates, winners are being announced, and who's taking office. But one of the reasons we're so concerned about this is because there's lots of research, and I'm just going to show you a very tiny taste that shows how much perceptions of the public perceptions of election quality affect all kinds of other attitudes about the political system and people's participation, their commitment, all kinds of things. So this comes from a paper by Etonibi Alamika from Nigeria that looked at an earlier round of Afrobarometer data and just broke down between those who said the elections were not free and fair, which is the yellow bars, and those who said they were completely free and fair, the blue bars. And you can see that on a lot of different indicators, there's a huge gap between those two groups. People who didn't think the elections were free and fair, only 31% said they trusted the president, compared to 81% among those who thought they were completely free and fair. And you can see similar or even wider gaps across other indicators. Right there in the middle, 19% of those who thought the election wasn't free and fair were satisfied with democracy, compared to 73% among those who thought the election was free and fair. Excuse me. So, and as I mentioned, there's a lot of other studies out there looking at these effects of election quality on other kinds of attitudes. So we see, if you think an election was free and fair, if you believe that your elections are high quality, you're more likely to participate. You're more likely to have higher institutional trust and confidence in the future. You're more likely to be satisfied with democracy. You're more likely to support the ruling government and believe in its legitimacy, even if you didn't vote for it, and to accept the defeat of your own candidates. And it reduces the gaps in trust between the people whose candidates won and the people whose candidates lost. And I will leave it at that. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Caroline, for the presentation and a good study that you've done. We'll now have our next presentation that will be from, we've seen the Kenyan perspectives. We will now get to technology and elections in Botswana that will be presented by Kialoboga Dipogiso, who is a lecturer, political and administrative studies at the University of Botswana. As you can see from his bio, his research interests are around urbanity, migration and livelihoods, participatory democracy, globalization, social movements, and all that. So welcome, sir, for your presentation focusing on technology usage in elections in Botswana. Thank you.
Thank you, colleagues. Thank you so much for the opportunity. I'll be presenting on the use of technology in elections in Botswana. I hope you can all hear me. Can you kindly move to the next slide? I start first by introducing Botswana as a sub-Saharan nation. I think most people in attendance would know about it. Gained independence in 1966 from the British without any problems whatsoever, what other people call a silver plate. Botswana is it's a country with a little below 3 million in population. It has sustained a favorable macroeconomic reputation since independence of about maybe 6 to 7% on average annually. And it has been renowned for building strong democratic institutions. However, the country has been rather criticized for what rather other people call a one-party predominant system, which I'll talk about a little bit later. It grew from being one of the impoverished countries in 1966. And most importantly, it has been able to hold elections every 5 years, contrary to some African states which have experienced problems in terms of holding elections in that regard. And one other important thing is that in most of the elections, almost all elections, they have been violent free. They haven't been marred with internal cleavages and other issues that normally dog the credibility of elections in African states. Can we move to the next slide, please? And importantly, we also argue that despite having grown since independence, there has been widespread inequalities, both economically and politically. There are very rather impoverished places in the country that do not share the benefits of growth, and there are also marginalized groups in the country that do not have a political voice in terms of representation in representative forums like parliament and councils, and this has created that problem of inequality in the country. As I said earlier, the political process is normally characterized as democratic, whilst other people argue that it is a de facto one-party state because there hasn't been reciprocity in terms of sharing political power. And quite a number of factors account for this particular institution in the country, especially excessive executive power of the presidency and dominance of the ruling party, which the ruling party has been able to use it to consolidate their hegemonic control of the political process, including the voting system in the country, first past the post, which favors the ruling party in that regard. We also argue that there has been the political process has been marred by weakness and disorganization of opposition parties, particularly their tendency to split every now and then, causing there to be very lesser and lesser competition from the opposition political side. However, around 2009, and I will touch a bit on that, there has been a rise in competition and competitiveness from the opposition vote. With regards to the topic of the use of technology in elections, I assume the perspectives of James Adam, who argues that party competition may be based on other issues that are rather not policy oriented, that may have the possibility of enhancing the efficiency of parties in terms of them being able to compete for political power. And I argue that the use of technology has created a leverage for opposition political parties to actually compete with the ruling party in the recent years, contrary to what has been happening in the past, where the ruling party has a monopoly of means of communication in the country, therefore being able to exploit them to their advantage in that regard. We move to the next slide. And we argue that despite the disorganization within the opposition, the BDP's hegemonic project has been declining since the 1980s. Since independence, the BDP's popular vote has been declining in that regard. Only recently we've had it winning an absolute majority in terms of the popular vote of the people in parliamentary elections. And this accounts to what Potete and Bouchard said that there has been rising competitiveness of the political process since 2009, accounting for that particular loss of hegemony of the ruling party since the 1980s. This is despite the multi-fold disorganization and internal bickering of opposition parties that normally has led to splinter opposition groups in the country. And more importantly, around 2009, 2010, the ruling party has also experienced a very mega split, leading to the formation of the Botswana Movement for Democracy, which joined forces with the Botswana National Front and the BCP to Botswana Congress Party to actually contest against the BDP in 2014. We argue that technology can contribute to elections in three ways. In the country, it has disrupted BDP's monopoly in terms of access to the electorate, which I mentioned earlier that the BDP has had monopoly of communication using state media And this has caused, has muzzled the opposition voice. And the introduction of technology, I think around 2010, 2011, 2013 in the country has caused for the opposition to actually leverage on the ubiquity of information in the in various technological platforms to actually compete with the ruling party. We also argue that technology can enhance internal party management, where the parties can particularly use technology to organize themselves internally. Thirdly, I argue that technology has actually increased efficiency can actually increase efficiency during national elections, even though in the country we haven't had that opportunity, and we'll discuss that in a few moments. Move to the next slide, please. Okay, campaign strategies can actually be centered around new media, because new media is particularly quicker and more efficient. The various political organizations can actually leverage on the presence of different media platforms to particularly reach out to more clientele and more numbers of electorate across the country. And we have evidence from a publication by Masilo and Sabo there, which argues that in 2014, during 2014 elections, we had a surge in terms of the use of technology, particularly the three that I wrote there: the Facebook, Twitter, and WhatsApp groups that were being used to actually enhance the presence of different political organizations. And these are platforms that are normally cheaper, that a lot of people can actually access, especially the youth. And we also argue that they provide equity in terms of information, rather than having to rely on the public media, which has been the state media rather, which has been controlled by the ruling party or the government in that regard. And it is uncensored. Everyone can communicate whatever they want to communicate on social media, including party lieutenants, including party leaders, including the followers of the political organizations. They can, and actually in 2014, where there was a controversy over the death of the BMD leader, information was all over social media about questions over his death, and this actually caused for sympathy votes in the opposition vote. Can we move to the next slide, please? We also argue that technology can actually enhance internal party management, because the local social media space, parties have created various communication platforms that they can actually use to enhance their communication viabilities. Recently, press conferences have been held on real time, where people can actually listen on first-hand information and share the information immediately and make it as ubiquitous as possible, rather than having to wait for print media, for the conventional media to actually disseminate the use in like it used to happen in the past. So there's also increased interaction between party members, both vertically and horizontally. It is rather more efficient in the terms of communicating information at a vertical level and also at a horizontal level. And we also argue that at the height of COVID-19, parties also host virtual conferences. And actually the Botswana Congress Party, the current National Executive Committee of the Botswana Congress Party was voted through a virtual Congress, which clearly shows that technology has been can actually be used to leverage efficiency where possible. Can we move to the next slide, please? Now we move on to the national elections in terms of how they can actually leverage on technology. The country has been talking about this issue of introducing electronic voting machines, which has caused quite a substantive controversy in the political process. There has been evidence that there is need, obviously, to enhance the efficiency of the electoral process, that we can actually quicken the turnaround time for releasing the results. We can actually count the results faster than count the ballots faster than we do normally with printed ballots in that regard. And there has been consultations over the use of the possible use of electronic voting machines after I think around 2016 or so, led by the electoral, the IEC, the Electoral Commission, Independent Electoral Commission. And these consultations were marred by controversy. They recommended the use of electronic voting machines for the 2019 elections, despite there being widespread resistance from other stakeholders in the political process, political parties and other stakeholders like civic society organizations. But the main issue has been that there is a lack of proper regulatory framework where people can actually challenge the results. The parties are not competent enough themselves to actually monitor the systems as they probably count the elections in that regard. And there has been evidence that there's inadequate access to facility, particularly in the rural areas where people can actually access information in new media and leverage on it for the purpose of national elections. And we also argue that there is lack of strategic capacity to handle change, particularly on the issue of consultations, the consultations that have been marred by controversy. Most participants in the consultative process there is a traditional forum here in Botswana called the Khotla system, the people from the Khotla system, and there has been evidence that the IEC actually hasn't gone to every part of the country to actually solicit for people's views in terms of whether or not to introduce electronic voting machines. And actually, can we move to the next slide, please? Actually, the Afrobarometer study shows that Afrobarometer study by Mamo Getsani, Sabo, and Moseki shows that there is lack of legitimacy there was lack of legitimacy in terms of introduction of electronic voting machines. Questions asked to respondents revealed that the majority of the people didn't have confidence in electronic voting machines. The civic society organizations also disapproved the use of voting machines in that regard. So the opposition, as I mentioned earlier, was also averse to the use or the introduction of electronic voting devices, despite evidence that they could actually assist in terms of enhancing efficiency in the electoral process in the country. So we argue that there is a prospect of use and there is need for careful consideration when we introduce electronic voting machines in the country, because actually there's evidence from other countries that it enhances the efficiency of conducting elections. However, these consultations for introduction of these voting machines have to be more pluralistic and more inclusive of more people in the political process to make it more legitimate in that regard. So, as a way of concluding, in the next slide, I argue that the use of technology may be able to enhance party management. I argue this because I think that the competitiveness of the electoral process or the political process depends on the viability of the political parties themselves, whether they are properly managed, whether they are efficient, whether they are able to actually compete with other political organizations. And technology can actually be one of the leverages that parties can use to enhance their efficiency, especially in terms of communication. Secondly, political parties may enrich their campaign strategies. They can actually enhance their discursive power, their interaction with the people, because of the new space of social media and new media technologies that are available in the political process. This can actually assist political parties to reach out to more clientele, to reach out to more electorate, and all of that. And lastly, I argue that the legitimate use of EVMs in the national elections may actually enhance electoral efficiency, even though we need to ensure that the consultative processes are more inclusive, they are more legitimate, and they represent the general will of the people in that regard. Thank you so much for your listenership. I think I was well on time.
Thank you for the stimulating discussion on the usage of elections in technology in elections in Botswana. Colleagues, please feel free to type in any questions on chat. We'll take all questions and post them to the panelists at the end of the discussion. We are now going to have our last presentation, which is from Mercy Kaburu, who is a lecturer of foreign policy analysis in the Department of International Relations at the United States International University in Africa. And her focus now will be on Kenya, technology and elections in Kenya. Mercy, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Justin, can I have the slides? Very good. Okay, so I bet you can hear me. I'm going to take you through technology and elections in Kenya. I'll focus on Kenya because Kenya just concluded her elections just the other day in August, and took the process of going to the Supreme Court to again determine elections or election results for the third time. So next slide, please. So what about Kenya? The background, we need to, Kenya is a country that has embraced technology in the last 3 rounds of her elections, basically because it is after adopting the new constitution in 2010, the adoption of technology became one of the areas that were really focused in the new constitution because of what the country had gone through. As a country, Kenya adopted, embraced democracy at independence in 1963, and for the longest time, all through, has taken into elections to put to have leadership into office. And when if you're checking on Caroline's presentation, realize that Kenya's 74% of Kenyans embrace elections as a means of having leadership into office. Well, Kenya has grown as a country. Looking back to where the country has come from, the process of election or voting has been a little bit quite interesting, intriguing, sometimes very challenging to say the least. Because what we look at in elections, we are looking for we are looking for fairness, we are looking for credibility of elections, we are looking for openness, we are looking for basically transparency in the process. But when you look at the first photo that I've shared, there is the queuing system, which we call generally in Kenya, the Mlolongo system. In the Mlolongo system, the leader of the of the political party was supposed to stand in front. And then you look back or behind and see how long was your queue. And that basically determined who is the winner, or basically counting physically one person, each one person. And this was a very interesting, because if we are to talk about fairness and free process of electing leaders into office, this kind of process, what happened then was basically in the evening, people would wait and disrupt the queues. People would go home. And by the end of the day, what would happen is some people who had very short queues actually became the winners. And that changed with time. And so after 1988, I think we now adopted the secret ballot system. And you can see in the second photo, we've had secret ballot system for a long period of time. But the most interesting thing is that the secret ballot system, as much as really brought a sense of organization in the process of election, is that there was a tendency of what they call ballot box stuffing. So you will find that there's so much, there was a lot of rigging of election, a lot of fraud. And this was experienced for a long period of time, because we had a secret ballot, I think from 1992 and all through. But basically, most of the process was manual. There was minimal, if there was, use of technology in terms of the voting process. Can we go to the next slide, please? So the change or the paradigm shift in Kenya's election, and especially the adoption of technology, can be founded in the 2007 and 2008 post-election violence. This was violence of its own kind, because it was barely after elections and the announcement of the winner that literally the country went into serious kind of violence, a lot of ethnic tension, and a lot of violence, where we end basically people who argue that the numbers of deaths were more than what was reported, but there was officially reported 1,100 deaths were reported, and then over 500,000 people were internally displaced. And for Kenya went through a process really of managing the post-election violence and its consequences that were dire, and that left the social fabric in the country seriously broken. And so there was a shift and thought of how else could we have elections in a manner that people would believe that the elections were free, they were fair, and that the government that was in place was legitimate. Because the main problem of the 2007, 2008, after the election, there was a feeling that there was a lot of fraud, and that whoever was announced as the winner was not necessarily the winner. And so the question of technology actually can be founded in the 2007-2008 general election, and the violence and the subsequent election, displacement of people, deaths, and a lot of destruction of property, and more particularly the social fabric that was broken. Let's continue, please. Next. Yes, so technology was therefore adopted as a means of enhancing fairness and credibility of election. After the 2007-2008 post-election violence, there was an independent review commission that definitely gave or recommended some changes in the electoral process that Kenya was using, so that to enhance the credibility or enhance the legitimacy and acceptability of the election results. And one of the reasons why, one of the findings of this particular independent review commission was that there was a presence of deceased voters in the voter register. So the voter register in itself was wrong, right? Even before the elections were carried out. So there were a number of deceased voters, and then there was also impersonation of absent voters during the voting process. There was defective running of the voter registration process, and then an accountable system to result transmission, creating a potential for manipulation, that is claims of vote rigging, and inability of the ECK chair to ascertain who actually won the election. The statement that who won the election came because the chair of the commission literally said, I do not know who won the election until we get the documentation right. And that in itself triggered the question, what needs to be done so that when we talk about this particular leader, this particular politician, the kind of government that we have is legitimate, then there was need to change the process or the nature or the system of elections in the country. Let's move forward. So the electoral process, technology is adopted in 3 ways in Kenya. So as much as definitely we have adopted technology as a means of election in Kenya, we cannot say that that Kenya has completely adopted the technology as in entirety in the entire process of elections. However, the Kenyan integrated election management system normally is deployed in 3 main electoral processes, and we are looking at election as a process. And so, because the election is a process and it's not an event, we are looking at what point do we employ technology. There are points where the country does not employ technology, but there are points where the country employs technology. One of the areas that Kenya employs technology is voter registration. So in voter registration, technology has been used. So there's biometric where all the information regarding each individual is taken and then stored in a manner that when you go to voting, when we get to now voter identification, when each individual and every voter gets to the process of voting, they must be identified technologically. That technology has to be used, so you have to be taken your biometrics again, and then there's a photo of you that has to be taken, because in the beginning during registration you're taking a photo, and therefore during your voting you must be identified through the KIMS. Failure to which you may not be allowed to vote. However, in cases where there's a failure of the system itself, there's the use of manual system. But very rare will you find that the manual system is used. And once the manual system is used, it is used in a manner that it can be ascertained that indeed the voter, there was a problem of power, there is a problem of the KIMS kit, it failed. So the kind of voting system that is put in place is in such a manner that that a Kenyan can only employ a manual voting system, which was also employed in 2022 in some areas, only when the KIMS kit fail. And there are a number of KIMS kits, like you can try the first one, the second one, and the third one. And it's only through the third that you can only be allowed to do it manually. Otherwise, the identification is very critical. It is very important because it helps in reducing the issue of impersonification of people, and also the issue of dead voters who have voted. Those are some of the issues that have been managed through use of technology. And lastly, the transmission of elections. When it comes to transmission of elections, most of the cases that have been taken to court is the period of voting, and between voting and transmission of voting of the results. There has been issues all through, but use of technology has enabled Kenyans to have the transmission of election results transmitted electronically, such that after voting, we call it Form 34E, which is normally signed by everybody. It's signed by the agents of every political party. And at the end of voting and the counting of voting, which is done manually after the voting has been done, then there's the counting. After the counting, once the form has been signed, then it is transmitted, it's scanned and sent to the main tallying center, which is the National Tallying Center, which is done electronically. And the same form then it's carried for now manual counting and checking. So that in itself has helped in changing. Let's move forward. The next one. Okay, so we are talking about significantly, we have seen some achievement using technology. That, for instance, we have increased in terms of voter registration. 2013 was 14.3 million Kenyans, 2017, 19.6 million, and 2022 we have 22.1 million Kenyans who registered for voting. Is it because of technology? Yes, and probably no. There are so many other factors that may have affected that. Then efficiency in result transmission, it is real time, transparency and accountability in the results, that is accessibility, that is from 34 is were available for public in the public portal, especially in 2022, and discrepancies were easily identified. Then voter registration was made available for scrutiny by the public, credibility and legitimacy of elections, and then it provides a backup for electoral litigation in case. Let's move forward. I'm just about to finish. Then when we talk about institution, one of the institutions that are the core when it comes to election is basically the IEBC, the election management body. And one of the things that we always question is whether the public trusts the IEBC, because it's the one that manages elections. And when you look at the graph that I've presented, it is drawn from Afrobarometer over the years, because they have been following on the trusts of various institutions. The IEBC, first of all, the ECK, and then the IEBC, you can see that there's a lot of public trust in the, for instance, in between 2002, 2004, that at least over 51% of Kenyans trusted the ECK then. But I want you to notice that in between 2008, 2009, only 25% of Kenyans trusted the ECK then to deliver credible elections. That also improved again in 2013, between 2011 and 2013, when we ended the first election that were conducted using technology. In 2016, 2018, there was again a drop, considering that there was the 2017 election that were nullified, especially the presidential election. And then we in 2019, 2020, some improvement. And then in 2021, just last year, we can see that there was improvement, 45% of Kenyans trusting the IEBC to deliver credible elections. Next, please. Then what are some of the challenges? One of the biggest challenges that we have in use of technology in election in Kenya is the question of privacy of personal data. It is not guaranteed. And I can, most Kenyans will ascertain that indeed, during the electoral period and the public campaigns, people received short messages requesting you to vote for your governors, vote for your MCAs, vote for your MPs. And the question that most Kenyans would ask themselves, where did they get my personal phone number, such that whoever is sending you a message really knows where you're supposed to vote and can easily quote where you're supposed to vote. And so that's the biggest question. And though we have in 2019, the Data Protection Act was passed, there's the problem of it's with the weak enforcement mechanisms to ensure that the rights of people really are guaranteed, particularly on your private personal data that you normally have to hand over to IEBC during your registration as a voter. Then elections in Kenya have become significantly expensive. For instance, in 2022 elections, Kenya, we used, the government used 44.6 billion Kenya shillings, or that is 370 million USDs. There's also the occasional system failure. Every now and then we always have there's the question of some areas that don't have good internet connectivity, and that in itself hinders the question of efficiency, the question of transparency, and many others. And then we also have, it makes the election process a little bit complex, and sometimes it raises a lot of conflicts with the constitution that envisions that the process of voting should be simple and clear to every Kenyan. In conclusion, the last one. Yeah, so in conclusion, you're saying technology has gone a long way in addressing the electoral inefficiencies in Kenya. It is now efficiency, the question of availability, the question of accuracy, the question of transparency. This can be disputed, but to some extent, it has been able to address. Then the question of the right of privacy, of data security remains a very big concern, as I have said. Then there's need for public awareness on initiatives on the rights and laws relating to personal data. And also there's a need to enhance public trust in the election management institutions towards a more cost-effective electoral process. I think I've been able to cover the much I could. And the last line is thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that. I know we don't have much time, but we have time to interact and answer a few questions that have come in. Caroline, thank you. Your presentation was quite good. I've seen a comment saying that it was a very fascinating study and presentation. But Isaac is wondering whether the study took into account socioeconomic and education backgrounds of the respondents. Caroline, maybe you can answer like that. I know you had seen the question.
Yes. Thanks for the question, Isaac, and thanks, Amos. Yes, I mean, Afrobarometer studies, we do nationally representative samples. So the sample of people we talk to in terms of their socio-demographics and their age and other factors should match the population as a whole. And I didn't have time in my presentation today, but we are always looking at those kinds of factors when we evaluate the results. So for example, one slide I had that I had to take out was about who votes. And it showed that, as Mercy was just referring, younger people are much less likely to vote than older people by about 20 percentage points. So, but we do all kinds of analysis of that. And I've pointed Isaac and others to a few publications on our website, but also people can follow up with direct questions. We have a lot of analysis out there on those kinds of issues because it's really important to look at wealth, education, gender, urban, rural location, all kinds of factors in terms of determining who votes and what they think about election quality.
And thank you very much. I've also seen you've shared on chat a few links that can lead to that. And I'll now pose a question to our other two presenters, starting from Carla Boga. I hope I pronounced correctly. And this is about technology and trust and the elections. Is there a way technology, we know that, is there a way technology can be used to subvert the will of the voters? And I said this drawing from the presentation that Mercy has done. And in 2017, one of the reasons why the Kenyan election, general elections were nullified, presidential elections specifically, was because one of the candidates alleged that votes were actually generated using a computer algorithm in the process of transmission. So I would be curious to hear our two presenters, and you can answer in any order, that connection between technology, elections, and trust. Any order, maybe Mercy or...
Yes, yes, thank you so much. Thank you so much. In my presentation, I mentioned that there was lack. The Independent Electoral Commission made consultations to actually introduce the electronic voting machines. The challenge that we had was that not all organizations involved in the political process agreed. And part of the issues were that in evidence from other countries that electronic voting machines may have been used to actually, like you point, to subvert the will of the people by actually rigging onto the elections themselves. And one of the issues that were there is not an issue that it may or may not be the case that subversion can actually happen. It is about the people themselves actually trusting the process that the electronic voting machines will deliver legitimate results. So in that regard, the opposition, the civic society organizations did not have the trust that the EVMs will deliver in that regard. Secondly, they didn't have the competence to monitor the particular use of EVMs. So that was the main concerns from the opposition in Botswana, that they don't have the. Part of the reasons, the issues that they wanted to know is whether there is a paper trail that they can actually use to confirm that the people that actually voted in the manner which the results would have been released. Thank you. I assume I addressed, I met your expectations.
Yes, Mercy, you could go on.
Sure. If I get it right, when it comes to the question of trust and the question of legitimacy, and I think it's based on as much as we may not trust the process itself, the question is, why was the Kenyan election nullified in 2017? The Supreme Court was very clear. It was not about the numbers. So the question of the numbers, there was the alleged creation of a winner using the technology. But in the findings, the court was very clear. It was not even about the numbers. It was about the process. The nullification was not based on how the numbers were generated, because it was very clear and technology was very clear in that sense. But the question was the process, the constitutional process of announcing the winner. So I believe that definitely there's always a mistrust, because the question of, can we have the servers open? Can we open for us the servers? And that really brings another question of the complexity of technology that is applied. Are we able to interact with that technology effectively? Or are we having technology that is so foreign to us to a level that we do not understand the technology itself? Because those are the questions that came up even in the 2022. So for the 2017, I believe that technology was okay, but the biggest question that was really used to nullify was the process. Failure to follow the exact process that lays down in the Election Act of 2011 and in the Constitution itself, that you must have the manual, the paper itself that you transmit electronically, but also you must verify Form 34A to create the Form 34C. I believe that.
Thank you. Thank you. I now go to another question that connects youth empowerment to, and it's on chat as well, connects youth empowerment to the elections. And the question, of course, we know that the youth population is quite high in Africa. And Leps is asking, would you please comment on how to get the youth more involved in the electoral process and use technology? You know, how can the youth get more involved in both Kenya and Botswana? We know that the largest population of those guys who are not voting are the young people. So maybe, Caroline, you would want to take that before we...
Well, I'll start it off. I think my colleagues probably have more direct expertise on this particular area. But I mean, I guess from our perspective, one of the things that we think is a powerful tool is giving the youth information about, you know, for example, when I've mentioned that, you know, we see a real gap in voting participation between youth and older people. And I think highlighting and helping young people to see that gap and recognize you have things you want, and, you know, but you're not going to get them if you guys don't come out and vote. And our data shows you haven't been coming out and voting. So I think one tool in that is getting data information to people. And I think as both my colleagues have mentioned, the use of social media and other means and technology to get the information into the hands of youth, I think is a really key factor as well. I think sort of the dynamics of mobilizing youth are probably a little outside my area of expertise. And I think Mercy and Keleboha may be able to speak more directly to that.
Thank you very much for that. The next question really ties on what it takes to have public confidence in election results. And of course, we have seen that technology is an enabler. It's been used in the US, for example, and yet the results have been put to question. What, in your view, should countries do to enhance this public confidence in the results? Dr. Keleboga, would you please want to go with that? I'm sorry if I missed the pronunciation.
Yes, no, it's fine, Prof. It's fine. I think with regard to technology, because this is will be a process of managing change. The first thing that authorities probably need to do is to probably ensure that the consultations are as legitimate as possible. They reach out to the most plural of constituencies as possible, including the people that are involved, the critical stakeholders, the political organizations themselves, and the civic society organizations. And secondly, they need to be empowered in terms of the knowledge of how to actually monitor the system itself. Because here we are introducing, there's a prospect of introducing a system that has been used in other countries, that has had controversies in other countries and all of that. And therefore there is a little bit of mistrust. And the most important thing here would be the ability of the political organizations that are contesting elections to monitor the process and ensure that they are secure with the election result in that regard.
Thank you very much for that response. But then we also know the realities is that majority of the population in Africa live in rural areas where infrastructure is not very good. And at the same time, we expect them to use the technology. Mercy, what would you say? What's your view on the people living in rural areas and usage of technology? Shall we be eliminating them and telling them you can't vote?
Let me put it this way. I think yes, living in the rural areas, I think that's an assumption that there's not technology in the rural areas. I think we are connected, because I believe that if you look at the youth and the engagement that was asked, the youth and engagement, you realize that there's a lot of engagement, whether through short messages, whether through Facebook, Twitter, social media. And when you go to the so-called rural areas, you realize, especially in the bracket of the youth, the way in Kenya, sometimes our youth is not necessarily the youth that is understood, maybe globally, but the youth, you realize that they do not deal with the TV. They will use more of social media, telling you that there's the technology we are talking about. If only we could simplify what is this technology that we are using in our voting system, which is very complex. And I think that is where the problem is. The problem is really not with technology. It's more about simplifying, making it a little bit friendlier to the people. And once it is friendlier to the people, we are able to engage in it. And I'm making a reference to Kenya. And when I make a reference to Kenya, I only remember that we had failure of the KIMS kit, not in the northeastern part of Kenya where you would imagine that technology has a problem. No, we had it in the western Kenya, in Kakamega and other areas. So it means, well, we know that technology can fail, but it's not necessarily true that people are so in the rural zone to a level that they don't access. They do. It's a matter of making it simple, as I would say, in a manner that we can interact. And I would like to say, the question of whether people can trust technology. It is possible for people to trust technology. And it's basically because it's a kind of mental shift. And if I remember very well, people have talked about, we are not getting this right. We are not getting this right. But when it comes to facts, was this form, like I'm using the case of Kenya, was Form 34A that was transmitted electronically, the same as the Form 34A that was taken manually? Are they reflective of the same? Is it the same document? It basically means it can work. It can work, and it is possible to engage more people.
Thank you. I want to pose a last question that I will give opportunity 1 minute each to each of the panelists to answer. And the question is on what kind of policy initiatives then can enhance Africa to leverage on technology to improve our elections? It focuses on policy. Are there broadly what you can think through policy initiatives that can enhance us to leverage on technology to be able to improve elections? Because all the speakers have alluded to the fact that technology can influences and enhances efficiency in communication, improves party governance, registration of voters, and all that. You can go ahead, my friend. Mercy, you want to start?
Oh, when you said my friend, I was waiting
for
the gentleman from Botswana to answer so that I mean, when we talk about policy, I think we need to look at it broadly. And since you've given me a single minute, I'd like to say that I think with the specific case of Kenya, or even within the context, is first of all for people to understand where is the vote, where are we getting the final kind of tally. For instance, in Kenya, clearly, the final results are at the polling station. at the polling station, not at the final tallying center, which is maybe national tallying center, but the question of does the political class and the agents that they present, do they understand that at the polling station is where the voting is taking place and where the final tallying is actually taking place, because then it goes to the public portal. So as we adopt policies towards this, I think for me, it's more of creating awareness and trying to have a mental kind of paradigm shift of what exactly is credibility in election.
Thank you. Caroline, do you want to go next? Oh, okay, go ahead, Caroline, and then.
Sure. I mean, quite close to what Mercy said. I mean, I think voter education and awareness raising and research to help document the impacts that the technology can have. I thought it was so interesting what Keleboa said about the opposition and others in Botswana being resistant to the technology. And it is so important. I mean, technology can have this benefit if it can improve quality, but you also have to have people believe that it's improving the quality. So you don't, you've got to bring the public along with you when you make those changes. And so I think, to me, in many respects, that's the most important thing, because you can improve quality all you want, but if nobody trusts that you haven't, you've gained in some places, but not in a place that's really important. It's really important to bring the public along. So that would be my key point.
Thank you. And lastly,
I think as I made allusion, I alluded to before, I think there is need to enhance civic education from the side of both the authorities, being the electoral management authorities like the IECs, and secondly, the political organizations themselves, to actually try to have a common understanding on what technology can actually be used to do in the electoral process. Secondly, they need to be enhanced connectivity so that we kill off the imbalance in terms of access to information, because some other places in the country lack connectivity, and therefore there is that imbalance in terms of access to information from the political process. I think those are the two recommendations that I can come up with from this discussion.
Thank you very much. Our panelists, there are 2-3 other questions on chat. Please feel free to respond on chat. And I will now invite Joseph Asunka, who is the Chief Executive Officer for Afrobarometer, to give us closing remarks. Thank you, and let's continue with the discourse until things improve. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much. I hope you can hear me. Thank you so much for this conference. It's really great to sit through and listen to all the presentations and of course the arguments for using technology in elections. I do love the spin when we talked about elections. I mean, using technology not necessarily just on regarding the voting process, but also using technology as a process to improve the way political parties campaign, engage with voters and the like. And so I do think technology has a role to play, and it does have a role to play across the entire electoral process, not just the voting alone. But as you would have learned from the data that Caroline presented from Afrobarometer, fundamental to all that the whole democratic project is about. If elections fail to deliver, then democracy probably is completely doomed. And I think, and given the direction in which the world is going, I can see that now, no matter what we do, technology is just going to become increasingly part of our lives. And it is important that we leverage it as it is and then begin to see how we can use it to improve, the electoral process, both allowing political parties to engage with voters in a very effective way, which hopefully can bring down the cost of elections, because we always talk about, elections being very expensive. And so I think technology can help to improve, or at least lower some of the costs, and especially lowering the barrier to participation, especially when it comes to cost of elections. But also, of course, improving the efficiency and transparency of the electoral process. I think that is key, and we've heard that throughout all the presentations. So I do believe that we can use technology to our advantage. We can use technology to deepen democracy on the continent. And our data does show if people have confidence in the electoral process and they believe that elections can allow them to change their leaders in an effective way, in a transparent manner, it does help to improve people's commitment to democracy. Of course, across the continent, in our surveys, citizens are already truly committed to democracy. But then if elections are such that they are of high quality and technology will allow us to have more transparent and good quality elections, it will only go to deepen the commitment that citizens already have for democracy on the continent. So I do hope that this is not the end of the conversation. This is probably just the beginning. And I'm hoping that AAP would continue to, bring these sessions together for people to brainstorm, to think through ways that we can continue to do research to improve the use of technology in elections, but also figure out ways that we can engage, especially for entities and organizations that are into advocacy and engaging with electoral management bodies to see how best we can ensure that technology become increasingly useful for elections, effective, and also creating transparency in the electoral process. So with that, I want to thank you all for inviting Afrobarometer, for inviting me to give these closing remarks, and I look forward to engaging with you all. I hope that I'll be there in the next event, if we do have one, which will be super helpful. So wishing you all the best and thanking you so much for the opportunity to address you. Thank you, and back to you, Mr. Moderator.
Thank you very much, Joseph. And that's what we had to do. We had to do today, colleagues. And we appreciate your company, attending to these discussions, your contributions on chat. Silent listeners, I'm sure you've learned a lot. And a recording of this dialogue will be shared with all of us. So all the best. Have a great morning. Have a great afternoon for those of us who are enjoying our afternoon. Thank you.